Maya arrived at the military base early in the morning, long before most of the soldiers were awake. The sun was just rising, casting a pale golden light over the rows of barracks and metal fences. Her uniform was plain and practical, a simple gray jumpsuit that marked her as a janitor. She carried a mop and a bucket filled with cleaning supplies, her only tools in the world that day. To anyone watching, she seemed ordinary, quiet, small in stature and unremarkable. Nothing about her hinted at the extraordinary life she had lived before. The gates of the base loomed above her, cold and intimidating. Guards glanced at her briefly as she walked past, barely registering her presence. Inside, the base was alive with activity. Soldiers hurried along the pathways, some carrying weapons, others paperwork. The hum of engines, shouted orders, and clanging metal filled the air. Maya moved carefully, keeping her head down, as if trying to be invisible. But even as she worked, she couldn't help noticing the details. The way soldiers moved, how some of them whispered and glanced nervously at certain areas, the way the officers seemed distant and distracted. From the beginning, the soldiers were quick to judge her. Many stopped and laughed as she passed, whispering comments about her small frame and plain appearance. Just a mop girl, they called her. Some even tried to trip her by leaving obstacles in the hallway, thinking it would be funny. But Maya never reacted. She simply lifted her mop and continued her work with calm precision, as if the world's mockery didn't matter. Her silence and composure only made some soldiers more curious and others more dismissive. They couldn't figure out why she didn't seem embarrassed or angry. As she moved from room to room, scrubbing floors and wiping down tables, she observed quietly. She noticed how the officers' offices were organized, which rooms were most heavily guarded, and even which soldiers seemed most tense. While everyone assumed she was just cleaning, Maya was quietly taking everything in. Each step she took, each mop stroke, was part of her careful observation. She didn't need to speak to gather information. She simply watched, listened, and remembered. Some soldiers began to talk about her behind her back. "Why is she always staring at us like that?" one whispered to another. "Doesn't she know her job is just to clean?" But others, though hesitant to admit it, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Maya than met the eye. There was something about her quiet confidence, the way she moved with purpose even while performing the most menial tasks, that made people uneasy. They couldn't place it, but they felt it. Maya's routine was methodical. She started with the hallways, sweeping every corner until the floor gleamed. Then she moved to offices, carefully dusting desks and wiping down surfaces. She avoided drawing attention, yet she couldn't ignore the little things that seemed off. The loose lock on a supply closet, a drawer slightly ajar, the way a guard occasionally peeked around nervously. Most people would have missed these details, but she noticed everything. Her mind was alert, her senses sharp. What looked like simple cleaning to others was, in reality, a careful study of the base and its people. Despite her quiet diligence, Maya still faced mockery. Some soldiers left trash for her to pick up intentionally, thinking it would make her look foolish. Others made jokes about her mop, calling her the queen of cleaning. She smiled faintly at times, a smile that was calm and knowing rather than embarrassed. She didn't fight back because she didn't need to. Her work was her shield, and her patience was her strength. She understood something the soldiers didn't. Appearances could be deceiving. By mid-morning, the base was fully awake. Soldiers ran drills, officers barked orders, and the sounds of military life filled every corner. Maya moved steadily, mopping the floors of the main hall. For the first time, she brushed back her hair and allowed herself a brief glance around. That's when she noticed a high-ranking officer observing her from a distance. Their eyes met for a brief second, and for an instant, Maya felt a spark of recognition in his gaze, though neither spoke. She returned to her work, calm and composed, pretending not to notice. But inside, she knew that moment would matter. By the end of her first day, Maya had cleaned, observed, and silently learned more about the base than most soldiers could in weeks. To everyone else, she was just a janitor, a simple woman with a mop, someone who could be easily ignored. But beneath that ordinary exterior, Maya was sharp, alert, and ready for whatever the base might throw at her. Every whispered laugh, every sneer, and every dismissive glance only strengthened her resolve. She knew that one day, those same soldiers would have to recognize her true value, and when that day came, it would change everything. The days at the military base continued, and Maya settled into her routine with quiet determination. From the outside, her life seemed simple, just a janitor, moving through the halls with her mop and bucket. But beneath that ordinary exterior, she was always observing, always alert. Every action, every glance, every sound mattered to her. She had learned early on that even the smallest detail could reveal something important. Maya's mornings always started before the sun had fully risen. While the soldiers slept or trained, she moved through the base silently. The hallways were cold, and the smell of metal and oil filled the air. Her first task was always the same: sweeping and mopping the long, narrow corridors, making sure every corner was spotless. To most, it was tedious work, but to Maya, it was also a chance to notice things others overlooked. A scuffed floor, a misplaced piece of equipment, or a slightly open door. These small irregularities caught her attention immediately. The soldiers, however, rarely noticed her careful observation. Instead, they focused on mocking her. A group of young soldiers would often gather near the mess hall, sneering as she passed. "Hey, mop girl, don't forget to polish the floors with your tears," one shouted, and the others laughed. Some officers, caught up in their own routines, barely glanced at her at all. To them, she was nothing more than a background figure, invisible and unimportant. Even with the constant teasing, Maya never responded. She had learned long ago that anger and pride could cloud judgment. If she showed any sign of annoyance or frustration, her cover would be broken, and all the attention she wanted to avoid would be drawn toward her. Instead, she moved with calm precision, completing her tasks efficiently, almost mechanically. Every sweep of her mop and every wipe of a desk was deliberate, practiced, and meticulous. She was methodical in everything she did, and her quiet confidence began to unsettle some soldiers, though they didn't know why. Despite the mockery, Maya found small moments of satisfaction in her work. She noticed how the light fell differently in various parts of the base, casting shadows that could hide someone or reveal a hidden passage. She observed which soldiers were quick to anger, which ones seemed nervous around certain officers, and which areas were left unattended or unguarded. To an outsider, these might seem like minor details, but to Maya, they were pieces of a larger puzzle. She cataloged everything in her mind, storing information she might need later. The soldiers' teasing continued throughout the day. Some would hide small objects to see if she noticed. Others would leave footprints on freshly mopped floors, hoping she would be frustrated. But Maya remained unaffected. She smiled faintly at times, not a smile of amusement, but one of quiet understanding. She knew something they didn't. Appearances could be deceiving, and the strongest people often went unnoticed. During her breaks, Maya often sat quietly in a corner, sipping water and watching the soldiers interact. She paid attention to the hierarchy, the unspoken rules, and the subtle tensions that existed between different groups. A loud officer might bully the younger soldiers, while another might secretly pass orders in whispers. She noticed which doors were always locked and which guards were distracted. While she carried out the simplest of tasks, cleaning floors, dusting furniture, she was learning more about the base than most people could in months. One afternoon, Maya was cleaning near the officers' quarters when a young soldier tried to trip her with a mop bucket. She barely moved, stepping aside with fluid grace, and continued mopping as if nothing had happened. The soldier stumbled, and for a brief moment, the others were silent, surprised by how calmly she handled it. Some started to whisper among themselves, questioning whether she was really just a janitor. But they quickly dismissed the thought, telling themselves it was just luck or coincidence. Maya also began to notice moments of tension that others ignored. She observed a guard nervously checking his weapon, a door that was unusually secure, and a pattern of whispers between officers that seemed secretive. While everyone else assumed she was busy with cleaning, she quietly took mental notes, connecting pieces of information that others would never even see. It was this careful attention to detail that set her apart, even if no one realized it yet. By the end of the day, Maya's work was done, but her observations were far from complete. She had mapped out the layout of the base, noted the guards' routines, and identified weak points in the security. She had listened, watched, and silently learned about everyone around her. While the soldiers saw only a simple janitor, Maya knew that knowledge gave her power. She understood the base in ways that no one else did, not because she had authority or weapons, but because she had patience, intelligence, and careful observation. Even as the soldiers continued their teasing, Maya never let it disturb her. She knew that their mockery was temporary, shallow, and meaningless in the face of what she had planned. They laughed at her simplicity, at her quiet presence, at her mop and bucket, but they could not see the mind that worked constantly, silently, and strategically behind her calm exterior. Each day, they underestimated her more, not realizing that the very thing they laughed at was her greatest strength, her invisibility. As the sun set over the base, Maya finished her last task, looking over the now spotless hallways. To the soldiers, she was still just the mop girl, someone to mock or ignore. But for Maya, every sweep of her mop had been a step toward understanding, every sarcastic remark a lesson in patience, and every unnoticed detail a tool for the challenges that lay ahead. She carried herself with quiet confidence, knowing that one day, the very people who mocked her would realize that she was far more than they could ever imagine. As the days went by, Maya's routine at the base became smoother, but her observations grew sharper. She moved through the corridors with quiet confidence, her mop and bucket in hand, always alert to the smallest details. To the soldiers, she was still the same janitor they could mock and ignore. Yet behind her calm expression, Maya noticed things that others overlooked, patterns, habits, and subtle irregularities that revealed the base's hidden secrets. She had started to memorize the guards' routines. Every hour, certain soldiers would walk past specific areas, some more vigilant than others. She noticed which guards were easily distracted and which ones tended to frown at minor disturbances. There were patterns in the way they walked, the way they glanced at their surroundings, and the way they interacted with each other. Most of the soldiers assumed their movements were random, but Maya saw a rhythm, a predictable cycle that could be used to understand the base's vulnerabilities. It wasn't just the guards she observed. Maya also paid attention to the soldiers' behavior during drills and downtime. She noticed which soldiers were quick to anger, which ones whispered behind others' backs, and which seemed uncomfortable when certain officers were near. Even small gestures mattered. How a soldier adjusted his uniform when a superior entered the room, or how a seemingly casual conversation sometimes held hints of tension. Maya recorded all these details in her mind. To her, it wasn't just idle observation, it was strategy. Despite her careful attention, the soldiers continued to tease her daily. They would leave debris in places she had already cleaned, hoping she would get frustrated. Some whispered cruel jokes when she passed, mimicking her calm movements and calling her names. But Maya never reacted. She had long since learned that any sign of irritation would betray her awareness. Her strength lay in her silence and her ability to blend in. The more the soldiers mocked her, the more they revealed their own weaknesses and habits. Each insult, each joke was a small piece of information she could use later. Maya also began to notice security lapses that others ignored. One day, she saw a supply room left unlocked for several minutes while soldiers were busy elsewhere. Another time, she spotted a corner of the base that was poorly lit, making it easy for someone to move unseen. She even noticed a few doors that creaked slightly when opened, suggesting that their locks were worn or faulty. While the soldiers went about their routines blindly, Maya cataloged every detail. She didn't act immediately. Her cover depended on appearing ordinary, but she knew that knowledge was power. There were moments when her observations made her feel like an invisible observer in a play. She would watch as a young soldier fumbled with his weapon, nervously glancing over his shoulder, and she could predict how he would move next. She noticed how officers passed instructions in hushed tones, seemingly unimportant but full of subtle cues. Maya realized that most people never truly paid attention to their surroundings. They acted on habit, ignoring details that could have been crucial. That ignorance made her position unique. Even the smallest things caught her attention. A footprint in the dust outside a rarely used door told her someone had passed by recently. A misplaced paper on a desk suggested someone was careless or distracted. A faint odor in one corner indicated that something had spilled or been hidden. Each observation, though seemingly minor, added to the bigger picture. Maya understood that a single overlooked detail could later become a critical clue, and she kept all of this in mind, silently analyzing everything around her. Maya's ability to notice patterns did not go entirely unnoticed. A few soldiers, even while mocking her, began to whisper among themselves, quietly questioning how she seemed to know so much. "She sees everything," one said, almost in awe. "How does she notice that?" But these thoughts were fleeting, dismissed as coincidence or luck. No one suspected the truth, that Maya had years of specialized training that allowed her to read people, situations, and environments in ways most could not even imagine. Throughout all this, Maya maintained her calm, unassuming demeanor. She moved with slow precision, never rushing, never showing signs of fatigue or frustration. She allowed herself to be underestimated, knowing that her invisibility was her greatest advantage. Soldiers assumed that because she cleaned, she was harmless. They didn't realize that she was quietly mapping the base, memorizing routines, and understanding the psychology of everyone around her. Her mop and bucket were not just tools for cleaning. They were shields, allowing her to move unnoticed while gathering critical information. By the end of the third week, Maya had a clear mental map of the base. She knew the guard schedules, the officers' habits, and the weak points in security. She could predict the movements of soldiers, anticipate potential mistakes, and understand the subtle dynamics of power among the personnel. And yet, to everyone else, she remained the same quiet janitor, dismissed and mocked as unimportant. This invisibility gave Maya a sense of satisfaction. She understood that while others judged her by her appearance and role, her true abilities remained hidden, like a secret weapon waiting for the right moment. She realized that in a world full of assumptions, those who are underestimated have the greatest advantage. Every laugh, every sneer, every mocking glance only strengthened her resolve. She was learning not only about the base but also about human nature, the way people often reveal themselves through behavior, even when they think no one is paying attention. As the sun set each day, casting long shadows across the hallways, Maya finished her tasks and quietly left the areas she had cleaned. To the soldiers, she was just a janitor moving quietly through the base, someone to ignore and ridicule. But Maya knew the truth. She was no longer just cleaning floors. She was gathering knowledge, observing patterns, and silently preparing for the day when her skills would be revealed, and everyone would finally see that the woman they mocked was far more than she appeared. One ordinary afternoon, as Maya moved through the corridors carrying her mop and bucket, something happened that would quietly change everything. She was cleaning the officers' lounge, a room rarely visited by anyone other than the highest-ranking personnel. The sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off polished floors, and the room was unusually quiet. Maya worked with her usual calm, pushing her mop in slow, precise strokes while her mind continued to catalog every detail around her. Unnoticed by most, Colonel Rayner, a stern and highly respected officer, had entered the room. He was reviewing documents at a corner table, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the papers with a sharp intensity. He wasn't looking for her. He barely noticed the quiet janitor at first. But then, as Maya bent down to pick up a fallen rag, something caught his eye. On the back of her neck, partially hidden by the collar of her jumpsuit, was a tattoo. It wasn't a casual design or decorative piece. It was a symbol, a detailed insignia that belonged to a top-tier covert operations unit, one that few had ever seen and even fewer were allowed to know about. Colonel Rayner froze for a moment, the documents slipping slightly from his hands. The insignia stirred memories he had long tried to forget. Classified missions, elite operatives, and the rare few who had achieved feats most soldiers could only dream of. He glanced again, making sure he wasn't mistaken. The tattoo was unmistakable. It wasn't a decorative mark. It was a declaration of skill, experience, and lethal precision. His eyes narrowed, suspicion and recognition mingling as he studied the woman who had moved so quietly through his base for weeks. Maya, sensing that someone was observing her closely, continued her work without change. Her movements remained fluid, deliberate, and calm. She did not flinch and she did not hide the tattoo. In fact, she knew the moment might come when someone would notice it. Her calm demeanor suggested she had been here before, many times in situations far more dangerous than a mere military base. The soldiers who had mocked her daily would have been shocked if they knew that the quiet janitor had once been one of the most feared operatives in a highly classified unit. Colonel Rayner rose from his chair slowly, moving closer but keeping his voice low. "Maya," he said, testing her reaction. She looked up briefly, her face composed, eyes calm but alert. There was no fear, no hesitation. He asked casually, "That's quite a tattoo you have on the back of your neck. Care to explain it?" Maya paused for just a second, then slowly lifted her hair, revealing the full design. It was perfectly executed, clearly marking her as someone who had undergone specialized training and achieved ranks that most soldiers could only imagine. Her answer was measured. She did not boast. She did not reveal everything at once. Instead, she spoke quietly, almost matter-of-factly, acknowledging her past as part of a covert operations team. She explained that her presence at the base as a janitor was intentional, part of a mission to observe and understand the operations from the inside. While the soldiers assumed she was invisible and powerless, the tattoo confirmed her identity and experience. Colonel Rayner's mind raced. The quiet woman who had blended into the background for weeks was not who everyone believed her to be. She had been underestimated at every turn, dismissed as a simple janitor, and mocked by soldiers who thought her only role was to clean. Yet here was proof, etched on her neck, that she was far more than they could ever imagine. Her calm, collected demeanor now made perfect sense. She had been trained to move unnoticed, to observe without drawing attention, and to act decisively when the time came. For the first time, Maya was no longer invisible. Colonel Rayner's eyes softened slightly, a mix of respect and curiosity appearing in his gaze. "You've been here observing everything, haven't you?" he asked, not as a question, but as a statement. Maya nodded subtly, without words, her silence carrying more weight than any explanation could. In that quiet moment, the balance of perception shifted. The soldiers' mockery, the casual dismissals, they all seemed trivial in comparison to the truth revealed by a simple symbol on her neck. From that day on, Maya's position on the base began to change. Not outwardly, but in subtle ways. Colonel Rayner watched her differently, his respect growing as he recognized her skill and strategic mind. The ordinary mop and bucket she carried were no longer just cleaning tools. They were symbols of her ability to move unnoticed, to operate under the radar while gathering information that could be critical at any moment. Meanwhile, the soldiers remained oblivious to the significance of the tattoo. To them, Maya still appeared to be the same quiet, ordinary janitor, quietly mopping floors and cleaning hallways. But the commander now saw her in a new light. The woman they had mocked for weeks, dismissed as powerless, had a past filled with danger, skill, and intelligence far beyond their understanding. This discovery was more than just recognition, it was a turning point. Maya's quiet patience, her calm observation, and her willingness to be underestimated had brought her to this moment. The tattoo on her neck was not just a mark of her past. It was a signal to those who knew its meaning that she was capable, experienced, and ready for the challenges ahead. And while she continued her work as before, the balance of power had subtly shifted. The quiet janitor had become a presence that could not be ignored, even if everyone else was still blind to her true identity. By the end of the day, Maya moved through the hallways as usual, her mop gliding across the polished floors, her movements unhurried and deliberate. She knew the soldiers were still unaware of who she really was, and she intended to keep it that way, at least for now. The tattoo had revealed her truth to one key person, but the rest of the base remained in the dark. And that secrecy, combined with her skill, gave her the perfect advantage for what was yet to come. After the commander, Colonel Rayner, noticed Maya's tattoo, a quiet tension settled between them. For weeks, she had been invisible to everyone, but now one person saw her for who she truly was. The recognition in his eyes was unmistakable, and yet, Maya didn't flaunt her abilities. She knew that revealing too much too soon could change the delicate balance she had maintained. She moved carefully, continuing her cleaning tasks as usual, her mop gliding over the polished floors, her bucket rattling softly against the tiles. But now, every action carried a new weight, a silent understanding that her cover was partially lifted. Colonel Rayner decided to speak to her privately later that day. He called her into his office under the pretense of asking routine questions. Maya entered calmly, her posture relaxed, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. There was no fear in her gaze, only the quiet confidence of someone who had been trained to face danger countless times. The room was small, lit by a single lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. She set her mop and bucket aside, standing silently as the commander observed her carefully. "Your tattoo," he began, his voice low, almost as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "It's not common. It's not something a janitor would have. Tell me the truth. Who are you?" Maya paused, letting the silence stretch for a moment. Then, in a calm and measured voice, she began to reveal her story. She spoke about her past in a way that was controlled and deliberate, giving just enough to explain her skills without revealing everything. She had been part of an elite covert operations unit, trained in tactics, observation, and survival. She had worked on missions that few people knew existed, operations that demanded intelligence, courage, and precision. The tattoo on her neck was a mark of that service, a symbol that only those familiar with her unit would recognize. Maya explained that her presence as a janitor was not accidental. It was intentional, part of a mission to observe the base quietly, unnoticed, and gather information that could be critical in the future. Colonel Rayner listened intently. His initial surprise gradually shifted to respect, and finally to a cautious admiration. The woman who had quietly mopped the hallways, who had been laughed at and dismissed by his soldiers, was far more capable than anyone could have imagined. He could see the calm control in her eyes, the measured way she spoke, and the assurance in her movements. She was no ordinary janitor. She was a trained operative, capable of reading situations and people with uncanny accuracy. "What you're doing here," he said slowly, "isn't just cleaning. You've been observing. You've been learning. You've seen things that others miss." Maya nodded, her expression serene. She didn't need to say more. The quiet confidence in her demeanor conveyed everything that words could not. The commander realized that her skills were far beyond what he had encountered in his years of service. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and mocked, but now, he understood that she had been operating on a level most people could never reach. The conversation marked a turning point. Colonel Rayner began to see Maya differently, and he started to trust her with more responsibility. He tested her subtly at first, asking questions about security patterns and personnel routines. Maya answered with precision, her knowledge detailed and accurate. She described the weak points she had observed in the base's security, the habits of certain soldiers, and the subtle dynamics between officers. Every answer demonstrated not only her intelligence but also the extraordinary discipline and training that lay beneath her ordinary exterior. The commander quickly realized that she was not just skilled. She was invaluable. He understood that her presence as a janitor was strategic, giving her access to observe the base in ways that even his most trusted officers could not. Maya had the ability to move unnoticed, gather information, and remain calm under observation. Her seeming invisibility had been her greatest asset, allowing her to map the base, study personnel, and understand its vulnerabilities without anyone realizing. Colonel Rayner decided to test her in a more practical way. He described a hypothetical security breach scenario and asked how she would respond. Maya listened carefully, analyzing the situation before responding. Her answer was methodical, demonstrating a deep understanding of strategy, human behavior, and operational tactics. She explained how she would approach the problem, neutralize threats, and prevent potential disasters, all while remaining undetected. Her calm, rational approach impressed the commander, leaving no doubt about her capabilities. By the end of the meeting, Colonel Rayner had made a quiet but important decision. He would begin to rely on Maya, not just as a janitor, but as a skilled observer and operative who could provide insights no one else could. He realized that the soldiers' mockery had blinded them to her true value, and he silently resolved to protect her position while leveraging her skills for the base's benefit. Maya, for her part, continued to act with humility, maintaining her cover while preparing for the tasks that lay ahead. From that day on, the dynamic between Maya and Colonel Rayner shifted. He watched her differently, with respect and cautious admiration, and she continued her work quietly, gathering information and observing the base. While the soldiers remained unaware of her true identity, the commander now knew the extraordinary truth. The woman they had mocked and dismissed was not just capable. She was exceptional. And as Maya moved through the base with her mop and bucket, she was no longer just a janitor. She was a silent force, ready to act when the moment came. Her past, her training, and her tattoo had revealed the truth to one person, and that was enough to begin changing the course of what was to come. She had been underestimated for weeks, but now her true role was starting to emerge. Quietly, strategically, and with immense potential. Maya was no longer invisible. Not long after Colonel Rayner discovered Maya's true identity, the base faced its first real test. It was late afternoon, and most soldiers were busy with routine drills or preparing for evening duties. Maya moved through the hallways as usual, her mop quietly gliding over the polished floors, her bucket rattling softly behind her. To anyone watching, she was still the same ordinary janitor, invisible and unremarkable. But beneath her calm exterior, Maya was alert, her senses sharp, ready for any sign of trouble. Suddenly, the alarm blared. Red lights flashed across the hallways, and a loud siren echoed through the base. A security breach had occurred. Soldiers scrambled in all directions, shouting orders, checking weapons, and trying to figure out the source of the threat. Panic rippled through the ranks, revealing the chaos that often hid behind their disciplined routines. Maya, however, remained composed. She had been observing the base for weeks, memorizing its layout, noting patterns and vulnerabilities, and quietly studying the behavior of everyone on it. Now all that knowledge would come into play. Colonel Rayner quickly found Maya and gestured for her to follow. "This is your chance," he said, though he knew she didn't need encouragement. Without a word, she moved ahead, navigating the corridors with the ease of someone who had walked them countless times. She knew the weak points, the blind spots in the surveillance system, and the areas where guards were likely distracted. Every step was calculated, precise, and deliberate. Maya's first observation confirmed her suspicions. The intruder was taking advantage of poorly lit corridors and unlocked doors. The soldiers had not noticed these vulnerabilities in their panic, but Maya immediately identified them. She silently relayed instructions to Colonel Rayner and a few trusted officers, guiding them to intercept the threat without alerting the intruder that they were being tracked. Her calm and methodical approach contrasted sharply with the chaos around her, earning the commander's quiet admiration. The intruder, a trained operative from a rival faction, moved quickly, confident that the base's defenses were adequate. But Maya anticipated every step. She had memorized the guard schedules and the layout of hallways, supply rooms, and hidden stairwells. She predicted where the intruder would go next, calculating each movement like a game of chess. As the rival operative tried to evade detection, Maya stayed one step ahead, silently directing Colonel Rayner and his team to positions that cut off escape routes. At one point, the intruder tried to use the maintenance areas to move undetected, thinking that no one would be there. Maya was already there, hidden in the shadows, watching. She didn't engage directly. Instead, she signaled the guards, who were now positioned strategically thanks to her instructions. The intruder was cornered before they even realized they had been anticipated. It was a perfect demonstration of Maya's ability to operate quietly and efficiently, using intelligence and observation rather than brute force. Even as the breach was neutralized, Maya remained composed. She checked every corner, ensuring no threats remained and that the soldiers were secure. While others panicked or acted impulsively, she relied on careful observation and strategy, proving the depth of her skills. The soldiers who had laughed at her, mocked her, and dismissed her abilities were now witnesses to her competence, though most didn't fully understand it. They saw a calm, effective woman orchestrating the response, but they could not comprehend the full extent of her experience and training. Colonel Rayner, meanwhile, watched with growing respect. He realized that the woman he had underestimated, and who had blended seamlessly into the background for weeks, had just prevented a potential disaster. Her calm under pressure, her precise instructions, and her strategic thinking had saved the base from serious harm. He could see the difference between Maya and the other soldiers clearly. Her training, patience, and ability to observe had made her indispensable. After the situation was fully under control, the commander gathered the key personnel and praised Maya's actions. His words were careful, recognizing her contributions without revealing her full capabilities to those who did not need to know. Maya, however, remained humble, quietly returning to her tasks as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Her mop and bucket were back in her hands, and she continued cleaning the hallways with the same steady movements as before. To the untrained eye, she was still just a janitor, but anyone paying attention could see that she was far more than that. The incident also shifted the dynamics on the base. Colonel Rayner began to rely more on Maya for insights, sometimes calling her quietly to advise on security matters. The other soldiers, still unaware of her true identity, were forced to reconsider their assumptions. Those who had mocked her began to notice that she was not only skilled but also calm, collected, and able to act decisively in moments of crisis. Slowly, respect began to replace ridicule, though it was subtle and often unspoken. For Maya, the breach was more than a test. It was a confirmation of everything she had known about herself. Her patience, observation, and strategy had all been essential, and her ability to remain underestimated had given her the perfect advantage. She had moved through chaos with ease, anticipated every threat, and guided the base to safety, all while appearing to everyone else to be nothing more than a quiet janitor. By the end of the day, the base had returned to normal. Soldiers were checking their posts, officers were reviewing the incident, and the intruder had been captured. Maya, however, continued her work quietly, mopping floors and dusting surfaces. She did not boast, she did not seek recognition, but the impact of her actions was undeniable. The commander knew her value, and that knowledge alone gave her influence and authority, even if the soldiers remained blind to the truth. The first test had been passed flawlessly, and Maya's patience, intelligence, and skill had proven that appearances could be deceiving. The woman they had mocked and dismissed had just saved the base, and quietly, strategically, she had changed the way those in command saw her forever. After the security breach had been resolved, life on the base slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something had subtly changed. The soldiers, who had previously dismissed Maya as nothing more than a janitor, began to notice that she moved differently through the corridors. Her calm demeanor, the precision in her movements, and the quiet confidence she carried now seemed to suggest that she was far more capable than anyone had imagined. Yet, no one fully understood the depth of her skills. Maya continued her daily routine as usual, mopping floors, dusting desks, and cleaning hallways. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. She was still the quiet, unassuming janitor who worked tirelessly without complaint. But those who had been present during the breach began to see her differently. They whispered among themselves, questioning why she had anticipated the intruder's moves so accurately, and why she had remained so calm when chaos erupted around her. Some tried to explain it away as luck or coincidence, but deep down, they knew there was more to her than they realized. Colonel Rayner, meanwhile, had begun to shift his behavior toward her in subtle ways. He consulted her privately, asking for her insight on security measures, and occasionally tested her knowledge with hypothetical scenarios. Maya responded with precision and intelligence, reinforcing the truth that she was not just a janitor. She was a trained operative capable of understanding and managing complex situations. He also began to instruct certain soldiers to observe her actions, subtly encouraging them to see her competence without fully revealing her past. The soldiers who had once mocked her were starting to feel a strange mix of confusion and unease. Some were quietly ashamed, realizing that their assumptions had been wrong. Others felt a grudging respect, though they struggled to reconcile it with their previous behavior. They began to notice the way she handled small crises. A misplaced weapon, a sudden equipment malfunction, or a minor accident in the hallway. In each case, Maya acted decisively and intelligently, often resolving the problem before anyone else had even recognized it. Even small gestures that had been ignored in the past began to gain significance. The way she carefully observed the guards' movements, the way she remembered the layout of the base, and the way she anticipated potential problems all became points of admiration. Soldiers began to recognize that Maya's quiet vigilance was not mere diligence. It was strategic thinking. Slowly, the whispers of mockery began to be replaced with murmurs of respect. "She sees everything," one soldier said under his breath. "She knows more than any of us." Despite the growing respect, Maya did not change her behavior. She remained humble, quiet, and focused on her work. She did not boast about her past, her training, or her capabilities. Instead, she let her actions speak for themselves. Her calm demeanor in stressful situations, her strategic thinking, and her meticulous attention to detail were all proofs of her abilities. To the soldiers who observed her, it became increasingly clear that she was someone who could not be underestimated. Even those who had been the harshest in their mockery began to change. A few soldiers, after witnessing her actions during small emergencies, began to approach her for advice or help, realizing that she had knowledge and insight that could benefit them. This shift in perception was gradual but undeniable. Maya's presence no longer evoked ridicule. Instead, it demanded a quiet acknowledgement of competence and intelligence. Colonel Rayner noticed the effect she was having on the base. By allowing her to operate discreetly while quietly demonstrating her capabilities, he saw that the soldiers' attitudes were beginning to shift without direct intervention. He understood that Maya's influence was subtle but powerful. She taught lessons in humility, awareness, and respect simply through her presence and actions. The soldiers, who had once thought her insignificant, were slowly learning that appearances could be deceiving. Maya herself remained focused on the mission. She continued to observe the base carefully, noting patterns in behavior, security weaknesses, and potential risks. She had learned to blend in perfectly while quietly shaping the perceptions of those around her. Every task she performed, every hallway she cleaned, and every interaction she had was an opportunity to demonstrate her capability without revealing her full power. This careful balance allowed her to operate effectively while remaining strategically invisible to most. By the end of several weeks, the perception of Maya among the soldiers had transformed. No longer dismissed as a simple janitor, she was seen as someone intelligent, capable, and quietly commanding respect. Even the most skeptical officers began to notice her insight, and those who had mocked her were often left in silent awe. They realized that the very person they had ridiculed possessed the skills, patience, and intelligence that could outmatch anyone in the base. Maya's influence continued to grow, but it was subtle and understated. She never sought recognition, never demanded authority, and never boasted about her past. Her power lay in observation, intelligence, and the quiet strength of being underestimated. Every soldier who had once mocked her had learned, whether consciously or not, a vital lesson. True skill and capability are not always visible at first glance. And for Maya, this growing respect and understanding from others reinforced her belief in the value of patience, strategy, and quiet strength. By the time the base had returned to its normal routines, Maya's role had subtly shifted. She was still a janitor in title, still carrying her mop and bucket, still moving quietly through the corridors. But the soldiers' perception of her had changed irreversibly. They had learned, through observation and experience, that this unassuming woman was far more than she seemed. She had become a figure of respect, a silent teacher of humility and awareness, and a living reminder that appearances could be deceiving. Weeks had passed since Maya's true identity had been discovered by Colonel Rayner, and her influence on the base was becoming undeniable, even if most soldiers still only saw her as a janitor. The quiet, unassuming woman with the mop and bucket had changed the atmosphere without ever raising her voice or drawing attention to herself. She moved through the halls with the same calm precision, but now the soldiers looked at her differently. Some still didn't fully understand her, but they felt it. A subtle authority, a presence that could not be ignored. Maya had learned to balance her ordinary role with her extraordinary abilities. Every task she performed, no matter how small, was an opportunity to observe, learn, and subtly guide the people around her. She noticed patterns in the soldiers' routines, the timing of officers' inspections, and even the subtle tensions that ran through the base. To everyone else, she was just cleaning floors, wiping desks, and dusting shelves. But Maya was silently shaping the way people thought, acted, and respected one another. Her patience and quiet strength began to inspire even the most skeptical soldiers. Those who had once mocked her started to notice her skill in dealing with emergencies, small incidents like misplaced equipment, minor injuries, or sudden alerts. Each time, Maya handled the situation calmly, efficiently, and with insight that others lacked. Her solutions were clever, often simple but effective, showing that intelligence and observation mattered more than brute force or authority. Slowly, the soldiers realized that their earlier assumptions had been wrong. The woman they had dismissed as weak or unimportant was, in fact, exceptionally capable. Colonel Rayner continued to rely on her guidance in secret. He often asked for her insight on security, on personnel behavior, and on potential risks. Maya would quietly provide advice, pointing out small details that no one else noticed. The way a guard's routine could be predicted, a weak lock in a storage room, or the subtle tensions that might cause mistakes. Her recommendations were always precise, actionable, and delivered calmly, further proving that her training and intelligence were far beyond what anyone expected from a janitor. Gradually, even the soldiers who had once laughed at her began to respect her. Some approached her quietly, asking for help or guidance, realizing that she had skills and knowledge they could not match. They learned, often without even realizing it, that humility could be as powerful as strength and that observing quietly could teach more than boasting loudly. Maya's presence became a subtle force that influenced the base positively. Her calmness, patience, and intelligence leaving a mark on everyone around her. Maya's tattoo, once a secret symbol of her past, now carried quiet authority. While most soldiers were unaware of its meaning, it had already revealed her true identity to Colonel Rayner, who continued to protect her cover while valuing her contributions. The tattoo had become a silent signal of skill, experience, and intelligence, a reminder that true power often lies beneath the surface. For Maya, it was both a badge of her past and a tool to navigate the present. One day, a minor emergency occurred. A small fire in one of the storage rooms. Soldiers panicked and shouted instructions, unsure of how to handle the situation efficiently. Maya moved quickly, directing them calmly, assessing the situation, and ensuring everyone was safe. The fire was contained within minutes, without injury or damage. The soldiers who had panicked moments ago now looked at her with awe. They began to understand that her calm observation, intelligence, and experience were not accidental. They were her greatest strengths. By handling incidents like this with quiet authority, Maya's influence solidified. She never demanded recognition or credit, yet her actions spoke louder than words. The soldiers began to trust her. The officers began to value her insights, and even those who had mocked her could no longer ignore her presence. She had transformed from an invisible janitor into a figure of respect, demonstrating that skill, intelligence, and quiet strength mattered more than appearances. Over time, Maya's story became a lesson for the entire base. Soldiers learned to think twice before judging others, realizing that true capability often hides beneath ordinary appearances. They began to notice details, to pay attention to patterns, and to value intelligence and observation alongside physical skill and rank. Maya's presence had taught them patience, humility, and the power of quiet competence. Despite the respect she now commanded, Maya remained humble. She continued her work, blending seamlessly into her role as a janitor while quietly shaping the environment around her. Her mop and bucket were no longer symbols of simplicity. They had become symbols of her patience, strategy, and intelligence. Every corridor she cleaned and every desk she wiped carried a subtle lesson. Appearances can deceive, and those underestimated often have the greatest strength. Colonel Rayner watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. He had known her abilities from the moment he saw the tattoo, but seeing the soldiers gradually recognize her skills and influence reinforced his respect. Maya had achieved something remarkable. Without authority, without weapons on display, she had transformed the perception of everyone around her. She had shown that true power lies in observation, patience, intelligence, and the ability to act decisively when it matters most. By the end of her time on the base, Maya had left an indelible mark. The soldiers and officers remembered her not as the janitor they once mocked, but as someone extraordinary. An operative whose calm, quiet competence had saved lives, taught lessons, and changed the way they thought about skill, respect, and leadership. She had achieved what few could, turning ridicule into admiration, invisibility into influence, and a simple mop into a symbol of true power. Maya continued to work quietly, but her legacy was already clear. She had taught everyone around her the most important lesson of all. Never underestimate someone based on appearances. Skills, intelligence, and strength often reside in the most unexpected places, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And for Maya, that moment had arrived, quietly, strategically, and forever changed the lives of everyone who had ever dismissed her.